Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the Embodied Business Inspired Brain podcast. This is episode 46. I'm here with my beautiful, brilliant co-host and co-founder, Ann Bishop. And we've decided to kind of dive into something that is a really, really big topic, but we're going to talk about it today because there is an election upon us. And what we're experiencing, both personally, collectively, noticing outwardly, is that we are all dysregulated as you know what. So today our topic is decision-making, uncertainty, and dysregulation. And we're going to dive into this kind of collective dysregulation that we've been experiencing and how it's amplified not only by the election, but by all of the unrest in the world and so many other things. So first, we're going to shift gears and start with our what's in process, what's in progress, just to maybe lighten the topic up just a little bit. And if you are hesitant to listen to a podcast, another one about the election, don't worry. We're not going to be talking about the election. We're just using it as an example for how difficult it can be to make decisions in times of uncertainty and when we're dysregulated. And we're certainly just kind of really in the soup of that right now. So no political talk here. And what's in process and progress for you right now?
All right. Well, last night we did a really fun, annual routine, which is to celebrate Halloween in the sense of carving our pumpkins. So we did some pumpkin carving last night, and it was really lovely. My brother came over, and so he is fabulous with my children, and it's sort of actually his routine to sort of come over and do the pumpkin carving. And this year, my children are now 7 and 9. And so they were really handling the knives, really well. But I mean, they're special knives that are made for carving pumpkins. And it was just really, I was sort of taking some video, like really up close, and the the shaking of the knife was like so like crazy, and like I'm like, it's okay. And then and I didn't say anything because I'm a pretty hands off, like I'm not too concerned they're going to hurt themselves, but it's also kind of comical to be like, I can't, just because it's very unwieldy to have a very large squash and you're trying to, they don't have a ton of, they're not using knives on the daily, although they sometimes help me cut things for dinner. But so that was just a very joyful experience to have, and I was very impressed actually with the pumpkins that they carved. I was like, whoa, you guys got really good. And then there was like a little moment of like, oh, like I used to be so annoyed that I had to carve for them and I never have to carve. Like it's that season is over. So, but they made some beautiful pumpkins. And I think so what's in progress about that is earlier in the day, I was feeling dysregulated. And I love that I can use that language about myself. I can be aware of it. And I was like, my brother can have a very regulating effect on me. And I was like, I just wanted to co-regulate with him, just be with him, and have him around, because he's so good with the kids and he kind of takes some of the attention off of me and he's sort of, really engaging with them. And it was great. It was so great. He came over, he stayed a long time. I hadn't seen him in a while. So, and I also was thinking too of joy and how to create joy, because I think, again, it's this careful dance of not always wanting to just avoid not feeling good or not being able to tolerate not feeling good, but really trying to expand those moments of joy. And so for me, it was just a very sweet experience, and I'm thankful for it.
Yeah. Well, we've been talking a fair bit about this, and it's been on my mind a lot. This idea of not just joy seeking like outside of what's difficult, to your point, right? Like not just like, oh, I'm going to go get a pedicure because that's nice. Or I'm going to, take the day off and not work because work feels stressful or whatever. It's that what I have really been trying to attend to is it is all the things all the time. And there is a habit in me of like, when things are difficult or challenging, or I feel overwhelmed or stressed or worried, that it literally takes up every space. It takes up every space in my experience and the way I think and the way I feel and the way I'm navigating and interacting in the world. And I'm just really honestly fucking over it. Like I don't want to feel that way.
Yeah.
So I, it's like, it is all the things all the time. And so how do we expand our view or our ability to experience, like literally experience joy, even in the midst of what's hard? And that is also what I have been like really working on, because I want to shift the way I orient to difficulty, to particularly things that I know are lifelong triggers, like big triggers from my childhood, that when they come on, or even triggers from my early adulthood, that if I even sense that there something is coming, I'll go into that like everything is difficult, everything is hard, and I'm irritated about everything kind of, demeanor. And I just don't want it anymore. So I've really been working on just being with the experience of worry or stress or overwhelm. But feel like I have a much lighter hold on it. It's just like loose. Like if I could hold the experience in my hand, I'm like, my hand is open and it's just there. And it's just kind of rolling around, and there's no grasping, there's no gripping, there's no sense of like, this is how it will always be, like that deep cellular sense of like fret or dread or whatever. It's like, oh, actually in the next moment it can be different, and right now it can be different, right? There's more movement. And it's funny because yesterday I had a pretty good day. We do mental health Mondays. These days are really rad for our team, and we've been doing them now for what, like 2 months, I feel like, maybe a little longer. And I could feel myself throughout the day yesterday, like regulated, dysregulated,
Gotcha.
regulated, dysregulated, And there was a moment where I was like, oh, shit, I had a long list of things I wanted to attend to. Like I really was excited to attend to. And it's just like, there's just not enough time. I cannot do everything. And then I picked up my daughter and she says, actually, this was on Sunday. She said to me, and it was a transition day for me Sunday because I had been traveling and just got home, and I was feeling a little overwhelmed, by reentry. And she said, "Are we still going to the pumpkin patch?" And I was immediately just like, "Oh God," like so negative about it. And I had to just like reorient myself and be like, "We can't go today, but we can go tomorrow." And then to get excited about going. And then we went last night and it was amazing. And I sat in the corn, the thing where they have all it's
The corn kernels.
yeah,
Yeah, I know
fabulous.
what you're
Like,
talking
this
about.
is amazing. Like it was like 2 feet
Like a
deep.
weighted blanket.
It was so rad. And the sky was so beautiful. It was like
Yes.
moody Colorado sky last night because there was some rain in the west. And anyway, and then it's just like, so just being able to do this dance, like I'm really working on that, so that there is like, it's not an either or, it is an and. It's like I literally want to feel and experience that I'm never so dysregulated that I'm totally out of touch with what is good and with what is joyful, because that has been my MO a lot of times in my life when things have been hard. So I'm just really, really, that's what's in process and progress for me. It's just finding that joy, even in the midst of what's hard, because I want to change my orientation really to my life.
Can you just share again what you said about the joy? So sometimes you find that if you're not able to experience joy, you'll just, or if something else is dysregulating, you'll like shut down the desire to experience
Yeah,
joy.
I mean, it's just like if we look at it like a pie chart, right? Like a lot of times, the way I have oriented around difficulty, like big challenges,
Yeah.
has been like, well, the entire pie is just negative and hard. And I'm tired, and everything is annoying, and everything is irritating, and everything is overwhelming. Like there's literally like no, not even resting feels good, right? So, and I'm exaggerating just a
Yeah,
tiny
of
bit,
course.
but
Yeah.
and so the shift for me is now it's like there is always room. It's almost just like the pie is cut in half. Half of it is dysregulation and half of it is regulation. And it's just always kind of doing this,
Mm.
like shifting. So the work for me right now is to be able to acknowledge or recognize when I'm dysregulated. And then, the emotional tone or quality or characteristics of that are for me irritation, annoyance, overwhelm, and like an inability to make decisions to our topic today. And those can be so like all encompassing that the work is not to let them not to let them be the prevailing experience. That it's
Mm.
like, oh, to hold that experience lightly, to know and trust that it will change and can change quickly, whether I just step away from the computer, I just literally go sit. Like yesterday, I worked out and I was feeling pretty dysregulated, and it was cold in the house because the temperature is getting,
Yes.
colder. And I was just feeling so I was like doing the thing I wanted to do, I was checking a box. I wanted to work out, but I was so annoyed. This is a characteristic. Like this is what the experience is for me of dysregulation. So I literally just opened the back door so the sun could come in. And it was just everything was different.
Mm.
So that's a tiny example, right? Of like, oh, here is this experience of dysregulation, even though I'm doing something I want to do. It's like, how do I find some joy in it? Like, how do I shift? Right? It's like, oh, just open the door and let the sun in. And
Mm.
immediately the room got a little warmer, and I changed my position, so I was actually looking out the door toward the school across the street, and just was like, oh, it did like the dysregulation doesn't go away completely, but it literally opens the door for like, oh, it's beautiful outside and it's fall outside and there's the heat, there's the sun. So I think I've said much more than I said before, but
Mm. Yeah, I know. I just that connection between when one is in a deep, or I guess in a place of dysregulation, and then there's a moment where we say to ourselves, or we make a decision of, well, because I'm dysregulated, then I will not seek joy. Because
yeah,
I've had
or
that
I
pattern.
can't.
Yes, I know. And like, what is it? Is it that you can't, or that you don't, or maybe the distinction doesn't matter, but it's unavailable, period, whether the
Yeah,
intent is whatever it is. Because I've had that experience in times when I've had a lot of like persistent pain or a chronic pain flare up. And through this work of the polyvagal theory, I'm like, oh, like I'm not going to make that choice to deny myself, even trying to seek it.
yeah, yeah.
Because, and so that's where I was like, I'm so curious about that. Is that like a cultural thing that we learn? Is it also physiological? Probably a combo. Is it something we learned in our family dynamics? That's what sort of made me want to like circle back to that moment where you said that, because I had not heard you say that before.
Hmm.
That when you're dysregulated, you also see yourself, not seeking joy. And I'm just
Yeah.
I'm just curious. I mean, so then I'm like, because I thought it was maybe just I thought it was just me. But of course,
Yeah.
it's not just me. Of course, that's probably many people experience that.
Yeah. Well, let's just talk about this for a second because I think I mean, just to be really clear, like this is over time been less and less the
Of
experience I have.
course, and me too.
Yeah, but I
And
can
yeah,
really I feel it still in me, like
yeah,
like literally like a dark shadow just wanting to take over.
yep.
So I think if we look from the perspective of physiology, particularly in times where we're dysregulated and the stimulus is or the catalyst has been something that's like deeply historic or developmental, some kind of experience or trauma that has, has a lot of weight in us, right? The whether we're having an accurate response to what's happening, now in the current moment, our physiology has created what's called an autonomic pattern so that we respond as if we were back in the original moment of the whatever the trigger was. And it is such a beautiful thing that the nervous system is like all hands on deck. Like you like the way you think, the way you feel, the way your body, tenses, paralyzes, softens, like all of the things, the way you hear, the way you see, all hands on deck because we're in the shit now, right? So physiologically, we literally like we can wait focus. Our nervous system is saying you've got to only think about this one thing because this is super risky. This is super threat. I mean, it makes sense, right? Why we feel a little bit overtaken by that. Whether or not the stimulus in the moment, if we're having it, this is the work I feel like I'm doing is like, oh, I only just had, I'm like making meaning out of something that's happening, but am I making accurate meaning or am I making meaning out of it based on past experiences? Right. So that's the thinking piece of it. But I do think just physiologically, everything gets turned toward whatever we're experiencing as the life threat. And it becomes very difficult, particularly when we are unaware. And when you and I were talking earlier about this episode and this topic, the goal is just to bring awareness to what happens to us in times of uncertainty and dysregulation and how that impacts our decision making. So it is the first step. And we've talked about this before, is to just become aware of like, oh, I get overtaken by this response where I feel like I can't attend to anything else. And then for me, at least, the psychological piece, and the two are always linked, right? That's the polyvagal theory, is that when I'm responding to, and I don't know if this feels the same for you, but I'm thinking about like the bigger triggers in my life. It's almost like I can't allow myself to think about anything else because I have to fix the problem. Like I have to figure out how to eliminate the threat. And so psychologically, I feel like there's a, it's like I won't allow myself to seek joy because that would deter me from handling the problem for dealing with the threat. So I don't know if that happens for you when you're dysregulated, but that certainly, if I can unpack the thinking that happens, that's like a deep underlying thought that drives my or has driven my not seeking joy because then I'm not being responsible, right? Then I'm not attending to the thing. I'm not focused on eliminating the threat, which then, of course, feeds the physiology, which feeds the psychology, and back and forth and back and forth.
Mm. Yeah, it just had this vision of a pie, right? And if we're able to say in that moment of the thing that is, historically very dysregulating for us, if we can say, but, is that true, right? Is that really a life threat right now? Or
Yeah,
is this just a learned response?
right,
So
exactly.
it's this sense of zooming out. because there is a physiological response of zooming in.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think what's interesting is if we can bring all of this to our awareness, that actually the joy seeking regulates us, right? Like opening the door to the sunshine or carving pumpkins with the kids, like it regulates us. And so we actually become more equipped, better able to solve the problem or eliminate the life threat or to think about it differently, right? Or to say, is this really, do I need this response to this thing? Or can I? And we talk a lot about this in our work is this is the root of behavior change, right? It's like, I want to change the way I respond to X, Y, or Z. And it's, of course, we have to attend to eliminating the cues of danger. But in that, we also have to assess, as you say, like, is it true? Is this really a cue of danger? And and then looking for cues of safety, because that allows us to regulate, which allows us then to change the way that we think, change the way that we feel, change the way that we behave. So let's just dive in for a few minutes. Hopefully, this has been, sometimes I just love where our conversations go. You never know. And I do want to just touch a little bit on this idea that probably every human being in the United States right now is pretty dysregulated. And the impact that has on our ability to make decisions. And we've got big decisions to make here coming up. And so we wanted to just unpack this a little bit and start to talk about everybody has a different capacity for uncertainty, right? So when we're looking, we can just use so many different examples, looking at like the financial market, looking at interest rates, looking at weather patterns, right? With all of the things that have happened for us in the United States in the last month, where we have had this incredible heat dome over the summer. We've had, hurricanes and crazy weather that creates uncertainty in us, right? Not knowing who the next president will be, obviously massive uncertainty. The war, there's so many things. So I think one of the things we wanted to just bring to the surface is there is a collective dysregulation, and it goes back. I mean, I just feel like it goes back maybe forever to some degree. But if we look back toward COVID, right, and the dysregulation and uncertainty that was created during COVID, that we are all really still metabolizing and dealing with. And so, Anne, you said something earlier in our conversation about feeling anxious and maybe like what's the impact of kind of this collective dysregulation or uncertainty on how you're feeling. And you said, like, I'm not really sure, maybe this is impacting me, but I don't think it is. Like, not being consciously or cognizant of the environmental uncertainty. And I just mean like out in the world, right? As an impact for feeling anxious. Do you want to say anything about that? That could be just an interesting jumping off point.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I usually come from this place of I don't think my mind experiences anxiety a lot. I
Mm-hmm.
think for me, anxiety is more of a body felt
Mm-hmm.
experience. And so when other people talk about anxiety, I'm not always like, I don't know if I'm like, because I don't necessarily experience it maybe as other people do. I mean, everyone has their own flavor, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so when I think about, so so I don't say that I'm like an anxious person. Like I guess I don't hold that identity. That I noticed that I was feeling anxious yesterday. Um, and in my body, it feels a little bit like tissue paper, kind of. If I were to talk about, like, there's like a dry quality to it. There's not like a oily quality to it, which to me would be like more relaxed and like so what I was feeling that, and because it's Mental Health Monday in our team, I said, "Hey guys, I'm like, I'm feeling a little off today, you know?" And I'm a person who grew up watching the news with my parents. We would talk politics with my aunt and uncle. Like, I come from a family where politics is something that we've just always talked about. I like to read about politics. Like, I'm all in it. Like, and so when I read about it and I learn about it and I think about it, when I learn and read and understand something, that tends to reduce my anxiety, right? Because I know about it and I get it and I'm not detaching from it. But yet I think the news is dysregulating right now. And so I'm wondering, and I'm having an experience of anxiety. I'm having some persistent pain come up, and I'm like, well, is it like why is this happening? You know, how can I help myself understand that more? And is it, maybe it's due to, I mean, goodness, I have opinions about the election. I'm not, I'm certainly concerned, but I'm not a type of a person who gets like outwardly superly anxious about it. But because we're talking about the election, I I don't just want to assume, well, that's not causing me any anxiety because it never does and I'm fine. Like, I really want to enter it with a place of curiosity. Like, is it causing me dysregulation? Hearing about these things that, sound sound like we could be really going back in time, and a lot of people are going to be unsafe. So,
Nice
yeah,
deep breath.
I just,
You may
I,
not have been able to hear that on the recording, but I could see, if you're watching this, you can see Anne take a giant exhale just now.
yeah, I think.
Well, let's talk about why. So cognitively, like in your intellect, you're like, this makes me feel safe. I want to be informed. I'm used to ingesting political information, talking about it, right? It would seem like it's all just not dysregulating for you. And yet when we think about, it's like, it's not just what's happening in the moment, it's the layers of dysregulation and uncertainty that feed dysregulation that we can be curious about. And, particularly there is an energy, right? Like a vibe in our world right now, because there is so much unrest, so much uncertainty, that it is impossible, if we look at it through the lens of co-regulation, which is a concept, one of the three principles of polyvagal theory. I change you and you change me. Physiologically, our nervous systems are reacting to each other, which is not a cognitive intellectual experience. It's an unconscious physiological experience that's always happening. And so I was telling Anne about coming home. So two things. One, my dearest friend, her husband is super politically informed, and she's not really like in super invested in politics necessarily, but she's like obsessively consuming information. And we were staying together, and she walked down, it was first thing in the morning, and she walked downstairs from the second floor just to come down and have coffee. And the first sound out of her was, oh God. And I had my back turned to her, and I could immediately feel like, oh, what's wrong? Like, I could feel my body become dysregulated. I wasn't even looking at her face, but I could hear her voice. And she had been listening to a political podcast.
Mhm.
And she immediately started talking about it. And it's the body language and the tone of voice. And I could feel myself becoming really anxious
Mm.
immediately. And I was like, in a loving and joking way, I was like, you got to stop. Like, you got to stop. Like, you got to stop listening to that. Like, stop listening and let's just enjoy the coffee. So we're co-regulating, right? She's impacting me, even though I don't know what she's listening to. I haven't heard what she's listening to. And then the same thing happened in the airport. Sitting in the airport, you could feel, like, you
Yeah.
could hear little bits of what people were talking about, and you could feel the like tension. We're all co-regulating with each other. When I get into close proximity to somebody, when I hear their voice, when I see their face, we're changing each other. And so this is happening when we're listening to the news, watching the news. It's happening when we're driving in our cars and we're engaging with other drivers. Some woman walked in front of my car this morning, which was completely dysregulating for lots of reasons. We're at the grocery store, like we're surrounded by like this. Everybody is experiencing some kind of heightened dysregulation, I think, right now, which is really the goal of this whole conversation for me, is to just, to use your language from earlier, Anne, of like, just let us zoom out for a moment. We don't need to fix anything at this point, but let's just zoom out and take a big collective breath, and just realize, like, it is a really difficult time. Everybody is experiencing some kind of uncertainty. Even if you are not cognizant of it, it is impacting you, right? And it is dysregulating you. And it's just the state of things, right?
Yeah.
It's so easy to just go back in time. Let's just go back in the last 5 years. Let's go back in the last 5 days, right? The last 5 weeks, of what's happening in North Carolina and Florida, overseas, in Israel. It's like all of these things, they have impact on us physiologically, even if we don't realize it intellectually. And it makes it difficult to then make decisions. And this is something, it's like, just to be aware, like, oh, it's okay if it feels hard to make decisions. Like, maybe you're feeling really clear. I think most people at this point are feeling really clear about the election for themselves, I would imagine. But even I have to fill out my ballot, and like, there's lots of local things I still don't quite understand. So I'm feeling a little bit of dysregulation. I'm going to sit down and fill out my ballot with my son, who will be, I think, voting for the very first time. So, but I notice that I keep putting it off because I'm still feeling a little bit of like dysregulation, right? So much uncertainty in the world. And then you and I were having a conversation, which, for those of you who are entrepreneurs or, in any position where you are responsible for developing, your own revenue, this is an extrapolation I have made, is like, there is a desire, there's an intellectual desire. People are still looking forward. They're still planning. They're still wanting to invest, and yet they can't make a decision. They're paralyzed. They're unable to make the choice to say yes. And so this has been very interesting for us to watch. Like, we're doing all the right things. People are excited. People want to do things. Even the clients we're working with, when we talk about their decision making process, right, is difficult right now. And in my mind, through this lens, it's because of this uncertainty that has really been building and building and building, that has us kind of collectively dysregulated.
Hmm. Yeah, I appreciate this conversation. as you were speaking, I think one of the insights that was able to come up for me is that I have a story, a deep-seated story that reading and understanding politics is soothing to me and not dysregulating.
Mhm. Mhm.
And I think, we grew up in a time where the Berlin Wall was torn down and the USSR was, became Russia and all of the countries. And like, I felt like as a young person, our world view was gearing towards better, 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 better,
Positively shifting. Yeah.
positively shifting. And so, and I literally have memories like with my folks, like being excited, like, oh my gosh, the Berlin Wall is coming down, or oh, look at this is happening, or like positive things on the world stage, like
Mhm.
this country is no longer being colonized, like it's becoming its own country, like it's no longer, I don't know, like, and just like what happened in South Africa and the ending of apartheid and just like all this positive shift, and then the challenge and obviously the horrificness of Palestine and Israel, and how over time, years ago, like they almost came to a decision. They almost had a two-state solution. Like it was almost there.
Mm.
And then for me to realize like that had those things that haven't happened. And I mean, I was even watching some news about, a horrific bombing in Palestine and how, someone was, I don't know. It's just things that I think really do have an effect on me that I would encourage you if you're like me and maybe listening to the news and your history has been sort of regulating and like it and you feel good and it's like a pat on the back that it's going on in the world. But because I feel like there's much less of we're going towards some positivity, and now it feels like we're going not towards positivity, but towards negativity as a world as a whole, that is dysregulating. And I'm
Yeah.
just going to say that for myself because I think in the past it wasn't. And I have that story. And so we have to change our stories.
Yeah. Well, I think this is just a beautiful point to end on, which is to stay open and to stay curious and to develop your sensitivity to how your body is reacting, because we need a checks and balances for what we're telling ourselves, what the meaning we've been making for our whole lives, what we're thinking versus what we're actually experiencing. And I just really appreciate that, of like, there is an assumption that you respond a certain way because historically you have, and yet there are shifts that are making, us feel unsafe, us feel less certain. And all we can do, and if we want to take action, the best thing we can do is to become aware of how we are responding physiologically. How is that impacting our thinking, and vice versa, so that we can be more steady, so that we can take the action that we want to take, whether that's changing our own behavior or getting out and actually doing things that make a positive impact in the world. Oh gosh, okay. Well, I think we're going to stop there for today. We'll be back with you for episode 47. We're going to be talking about some really cool stuff in episode 47, nervous system practices in women-led entrepreneurial systems. And we're going to dive in a little bit more to our mental health Mondays, navigating challenging conversations, and infusing nervous system practices to virtual team meetings and just your entrepreneurial culture. So stay tuned for that. And as always, if you like what you hear, leave us a review. If you want to hear about a topic or you have questions, you can email us and you'll find all that information in the show notes. Thanks so much, Anne.
Thank you, Chantel.